Good evening, everybody. I would like also to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, the Gadigal people of the Darug Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and welcome any Aboriginal people who are here tonight. As Jorge said, my role is with the New South Wales Department of Education, and I have been doing that for some time in the role of Refugee Student Programs Advisor. And my background is ESL, now called ELD, teaching in a high school. When Belinda asked me to come tonight and speak with you, I thought that it would be really nice to talk about some of the ways that we support students directly, and also some of the ways that we work with their schools. I just want to set the context. In New South Wales public schools, as we expected, we've seen a significant increase in the number of student enrolments in the past 18 months. We had expected a big increase, but we were very surprised, as was everybody, at the rapid rate of increase in numbers of students who enrolled towards the end of last year and at the beginning of this year, 2017. So you can see that the numbers identified, it increased by around nearly 3,000, 2,900. I think about 90% of those of the newly arrived students were from Syria and Iraq in that period. I think that the number in June 2017 represents the fact also that schools were better at identifying some of the students from refugee backgrounds, as well as the number that actually increased. I think it's a really useful way to think about how we work with students from refugee backgrounds, to think about transitions. And I think it's no coincidence that the publication that STARTTS produces is called Refugee Transitions. And I think that concept is a really useful one to think about supporting students in schools as well. Because the students and their families have been through so many changes and continue to go through so many changes. And those changes are surrounded by a period of transition, which involves emotional and psychological change and an adaptation. And while that presents challenges and students and their families have needs around those transitions, it also presents opportunities for us to work with them. Just a few of the transitions, that initial one of flight from their country as they escape and journey to Australia. The transition involved in starting school in Australia. The moving from one school or one setting to another. And then often moving between schools because of fairly high mobility. And then finally leaving school and heading off to work or for further education. So at all those points of transition, I think there are opportunities for us in working to support those students and their families. Before I go on to talk about what in the department we've been doing in the last few years, and in particular this year, I wanted to make the point that we absolutely have to work collaboratively in order to work effectively. And this year has been better than any before in that sense, because I have been working closely with a new team of 17 refugee support leaders who are executive positions based in schools who work with a number of schools around them. We have been working with the STARTTS School Liaison team, which is a brand new team this year. And We've also been working with a team of counsellors who the Department of Education has created in the last couple of years, who work with schools and counsellors across the state to increase the capacity of schools in the area of student wellbeing and provide additional counselling support. So that has been a pleasure to work so collaboratively with these three new teams of people whose sole role is to support students from refugee background. So I talked about the idea of supporting transitions, and I mentioned when I started today that I was going to look at it from the point of view of how we work directly with students to support their wellbeing and their learning, but also how we work with their schools. I think if you think about enrolment as a key transition, because it's the point at which any student enters a school, and think about the opportunities there, as well as the challenges and the needs of students, it's good to think about that period before. It's good to think about what actually happens in that process as students are enrolled, as schools enrol students, as families support the enrolment of their children. And then what happens after enrolment? What do schools do? What do they do to help students settle in? And what do students and families need to know and get some help with? So I think that 3 stages, and what do the schools need to know? What do they need to do to be prepared to get the information they need at the point of enrolment, and then to put in place, not just for the first day or the first week, but for the next year or so after a student enrolls. If you think about that, what do schools need to know before enrolment? One of the ways we work with schools is through providing professional learning, and an absolutely essential understanding for people who are working with students from refugee background is to understand the unique nature of the kind of experiences that those students have had. I've put a couple of links up there. One of them is to a website resource called Roads to Refuge. That is a public website and has a whole collection of short video clips on it. And there's one about the refugee experience, there's one about who is a refugee that looks at, you know, refugees and asylum seekers and common myths and facts about that. And then I found a really quite powerful YouTube video, the one that I've put there, which really looks at the situation with refugee children and young people, so young children and older children, and, you know, how they feel the experience of being in a camp in Jordan or in Lebanon and missing out on their education, and how it affects them in terms of just their skills, but also how it affects them emotionally. It's quite a long video clip, so we probably don't have time to look at it tonight, but if you want to get a copy of that later, or the links, then I suggest you go and look at that later on. So after working with teachers around the nature of refugee journeys, what it might be like to be in a refugee camp, what it might be like to have fled from your country, left your family behind, and the other experiences that are part of the refugee journey, we look at how that impacts on students in terms of those different aspects, how it might affect their their memory, how it might affect their body, how it might affect their relationships, their learning. And we have a number of different professional learning courses that explore those ideas about the impact of trauma. And we ask teachers to think about how that might look like in the classroom and how that might look like in the playground, so that we're trying to develop some awareness that will intervene when they see something happening. They'll think about it and reflect on what they've learned, and maybe not draw the same conclusions or have the same responses that they may have had if they hadn't been involved in that reflection. We work with a model that we call in the department the STARS model, which I think was developed by UNICEF quite a long time ago, and was based on the work of Judith Herman, which really puts a lot of emphasis on the idea that students and their families need to feel safe before anything else, and that safety is not about how safe you think something is as their teacher or their principal. It's about how safe they perceive to be in a school setting, in your classroom, in the playground, in transitions between activities, in a new classroom, in a classroom where there's a casual teacher for a day because their normal teacher's away sick. So it's really useful, I think, to keep that S for safety, which is at the top of the STAR, in the forefront of your mind. Once they feel safe, then they can start to develop trust, which is absolutely essential for developing relationships and connections with people around them and with the organisation, with the institution, with the school. Responsibility is something like skills that teachers think is their core business. We are about teaching students to be responsible and to develop literacy and numeracy and curriculum skills, as well as general capabilities. And often teachers are so focused on that they forget about those essential other points of the STAR. As a refugee, often responsibility has been taken out of your hands for some period in your life. And so it's something that really can help you to get meaning back in your life if you're given and supported to take on that responsibility. And there are lots and lots of skills that are absolutely essential in learning, in making friends, in getting on at school and settling in to the community in Australia. So we try and help teachers to get that simple STARS model in their heads so that, it can help them reflect when they observe and puzzle about particular behaviours or think about ways to support students. Those teams that I talked of, the refugee support leaders who were established in schools this year, began their work with schools using a tool that was developed by Foundation House in Victoria called the Refugee Readiness Audit. And so the way we use it is to help schools, in a sense, if you think back to those transitions and what schools need to know and do, we get schools to think about 5 main areas that are included in that audit and think about how they're doing those things. So in the areas of processes and practices like enrolment or transition, in terms of the curriculum that's offered to students and the special programs that students might have access to. like mentoring or after-school homework support and things like that, or sports programs that help them develop friendships and relationships as well as skills. In terms of the organisation of the school structures, the timetable, the classroom and school environment, partnerships with parents and guardians, and then partnerships with outside organisations. So we get schools to really reflect on how they might be going about those things and think about things that they might be doing well and other things that they might like to work on and get some help to do better. So the refugee support leaders have specifically tried to work initially with school executive in this area, because we have been working with teachers for a really long time, but really made a decision this year that to be more effective, we really need to try and work with school leaders to make those changes happen. And that has been challenging, but also rewarding. The Refugee Student Support Team, which is the team of counsellors, I'm just going to speak a little bit about the way they have worked alongside the team that I'm working with, who mainly have a curriculum and EALD teaching background. This is a team of counsellors who've been working with the team of refugee support leaders as well as the STARTTS School Liaison team, providing some targeted counselling support for students, working alongside counsellors to try and develop some skills and understanding around working with students from refugee backgrounds. They've also been working really closely with us delivering professional learning for schools that touches on wellbeing and the impact of trauma, how trauma might impact on behaviour and psychological wellbeing. They provide advice. They've got an advice line and an email that anyone can ring any time to ask any question or request professional learning. And they also have been working with a lot of outside organisations to try and coordinate and help schools with complex cases and in particularly in areas where the school might call and say, you know, it's not just about the student, it's about the whole family. In terms of the way they've worked in a high school setting, very much around helping the school manage the complex cases and develop support plans for students, professional learning and advice for the schools, again referrals to outside organisations and helping the school to develop ways of responding to those complex cases, and connecting up with a number of those organisations that can support schools like New South Wales Refugee Health, the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre, SSI, who are involved in the settlement support, and a number of their refugee health clinics, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, who have been absolutely necessary to provide some advice and support for some of those most vulnerable and students at the moment. And so they've tried to approach their role in a cross the board way and provide that comprehensive support for families. In primary schools, similar model, often called in more commonly around students who might be of great concern to their teachers or the school, particularly about their emotional regulation or their behaviour. Sometimes to assist with the enrolment of students with complex disabilities or families with numbers of students with complex disabilities, and helping with that helping with that school placement process, the assessment and school placement process. They've worked, as I said, with us in providing professional learning across the state, in providing advice and making referrals again to those organisations outside the department. We like to think about taking what we call in the department a personalised approach. So that doesn't mean necessarily that we have an individual program for every single student, but that we're really aware of students' needs and we know students well, and we can develop plans for those students who have higher needs based on a range of different aspects of their education, of their learning and of their well-being. We think of the fact that schools need to be safe and welcoming, and that we absolutely need partnerships with the community. So those are the contexts in which it's necessary for us to work. But we approach the support in terms of thinking about students' English language learning, thinking about their curriculum learning and how teachers can differentiate that so that they can support students at their level of need but offer them a complex and challenging curriculum. How we can support their wellbeing needs and their health needs. Provide targeted programs like homework support, mentoring, social support, tutorial support. And then for those older students in high school, thinking about how we can support them in planning their future educational pathways. So we've developed a number of approaches and a number of targeted programs to try and support those various aspects of students, and done that through a whole lot of different relationships, as Jorge mentioned. One of the things that we developed quite a few years back now, but just working on and refreshing again at the moment, something we called the Welcome Program. And really what that is a resource for schools to encourage them to make the most of those opportunities when students enrol. If you think back to that diagram that I showed you, when a student enrolls and shortly afterwards is a really key time to make some sort of a needs assessment on those various components, make some sort of a find out from students about what their interests are, what their strengths are. Find out from families about the things that might be impacting on their well-being. So not suggesting that it all happen on the first day of enrolment, but that crucial period around transition. There have to be some really good assessments and opportunities to assess and understand students' strengths and students' needs at that point in time and in that period of time. So this resource is designed to provide advice to schools and some suggestions about things they can do with students in order to provide students with information about what high school is about, what school is about, what the expectations might be, but also to provide schools with information about the students. So it's kind of a two-way plan. It includes some resources just for students to access to help them around expectations, needs, what you need to bring to school, as well as some sessions around, how you're travelling, how's it going, what's challenging, and, who can help you when you need some help at school. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have a look at a very short video in terms of the way we support English language learning in the classroom. So that little diagram, I suppose, summarises a very big body of knowledge, which is around what kinds of pedagogy are important for English language learning. So We know that a curriculum that is culturally inclusive or responsive is essential to find out what students know, what they think about things, what they can do, and also to make them feel included and feel valued in the classroom and in the school. We know that the one biggest, most significant factor in learning a second language is your first language literacy. So that is a really important thing for schools to understand. Scaffolding is a huge body of knowledge, but refers to, in the context of EAL, English as an additional language teaching, the temporary support that is put in place by an expert at just above a student's zone of proximal development or point of need to enable them to do something better with help from that expert. And it's about some kind of temporary support that is taken away once the student can manage that thing. And we have a lot of professional learning with teachers around what that looks like. We talk and work with teachers around the importance of maintaining first language and how that really can assist in language learning. And we provide bilingual support to newly arrived students from refugee background to assist with that, as well as to assist with communicating with students and families. Closely linked to the idea of scaffolding is a notion around high expectations. So our approach to supporting students in the classroom in learning is high challenge and high support. So we would always say the same curriculum, but increased levels and types of support to enable students to participate in the same things that everybody else can. And that's what all our professional learning is around, what that can look like in a classroom. And the other thing is the importance of interaction. So that you learn language by using it and practicing it. So that sort of summarises a huge body of knowledge in a simple diagram, but I thought it would be good to have a look at a short video clip that is taken in a number of classrooms. It was actually a few years ago, so forgive the fact that we call them ESL teachers here, but now we call them officially EALD teachers. And that clip is on our department website. You can, along with a whole lot of other clips that are accessible now to everybody. They're not behind the wall, so to speak. So go and have a look in the refugee pages of our curriculum pages, and I'll show you where those are in a minute, and have a look at some of the videos and resources that we've got up there. Just to finish pretty quickly, I mentioned that we have a number of programs to support students in the later years in thinking about their future pathways, in learning about the kind of expectations and opportunities, career choices beyond school. And we also have some tutorial programs and some mentoring programs that are that we've been able to develop with universities. The LEAP Macquarie mentoring involves university students from Macquarie Uni volunteering to be mentors in our high schools, and they go on to do a university experience day. And more recently, out of this program has developed a partnership with Macquarie Uni, which has now involved them doing some research around this and putting in place a refugee transition program where they have somebody whose specific role is at the university to support students from refugee background once they are getting into uni, but also once they're in the university. And they've also set up an enabling program that supports students in their first year of uni. So it's been going since 2011, this program, and through our collaboration, I suppose, it's grown and grown, and some really good things have come out of it. We also have another person in my team whose role it is to support schools in forming relationships with parents and community. A keystone of the department's local schools, local decisions approach, where a lot of resources were given to schools, was encouraging schools to get better at consulting with their communities and making decisions with their communities. And so we try and help schools to understand how they can make that happen. And that's a resource, again, a really nice resource that was adapted from one developed in Victoria, from the Centre for Multicultural Youth. We've adapted it for a New South Wales context. Just a few of the partners that we have in working with refugee students and families. Just, I suppose, to stress how important that is. And just finally, those are the web pages within the department's website where you can look at all our resources around multicultural education. So I just wanted to point those out as a final slide here and let you know that they're available to everybody now. Okay, that's finishes my part of the presentation, so thanks very much. And we've got some time for questions, I think, after the next presentation. It's just going to be an open question and answer discussion forum, so if you can just save that question till then, I'm very happy to answer it. Thank you.